Well, welcome to our talk about a very profound and, spoiler alert, really difficult question to answer. With
nonprofits don't have that. And we also have an education
in Almada. So it's Brooklyn 30 years ago.
But there's a whole process behind it, and there's a whole bunch of materials that you use to produce said drawing. And it's funny because when we started talking about ecological and pollution and ecological issues, paper was demonized. That the paper industry has really taken on this concern, and now it's, I think, 47 or 53% recycled. Drain
makes the best spec and thinking with the tools.